We're taking a risk even making this program, and you are taking a risk even watching it. Why? Because by the time this goes out, the world might be at war. Certainly the Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned the United States that any attack on Iran's nuclear facilities will have catastrophic consequences. But the head of CENTCOM, the American Generalissimo in the region, is right now in a bunker in Tel Aviv with the head of Israel's Army and Air Force. It seems that the possibility of catastrophe is right in front of us, in which case many of the discussions I intend to have today about Africa, about the BRICS, about the way that the multipolar world is hoving into view, all might be OTOs, and we might all be nuclear smoke. But in the hope that we survive, in the hope that peace can prevail, let's talk about Africa, trapped between a rock and a hard place, between the BRICS and the West, all using the original continent of humanity, all using the richest continent in humanity for their own nefarious purposes. The West seeking to keep a toehold in what was formerly all of theirs in the great scramble for Africa in the 19th century and the great upheavals and struggles for liberation in the 20th century. Some of the colonist forces are still there, of course, although France is rapidly losing its former hegemony in its former colonies. Other former colonizers are rather more clever about the way they continue a neo-colonialist hold on the precious resources on and under the continent of Africa. Of course, many African countries are now members of the BRICS, signaling an intention, at least for non-alignment, and with China's Belt and Road Initiative, the most important and significant tool, engine for development in the continent of Africa, and Russia's role in counter-terrorism fighting against the revanchist Islamist fanatic forces that have somehow gotten into several of the African countries. The superpowers are all there. But the question is Africa a partner or is it a pawn? Many parts of Africa are under sanctions. My guest this evening is talking to us from South Africa, which has been effectively declared public enemy number one by the Trump administration in Washington and by their lieutenant, Elon Musk, formerly of that parish. But the hand of imperialism is present in the conflict in Sudan, in nascent conflicts in Ethiopia, and of course elsewhere. We'll be discussing all of this and more here on Have It Out with Galloway. Sizwe SikaMusi is a social and political commentator and an expert on African affairs and history, based in South Africa, itself now under siege by the Trump administration in Washington. We're going to talk about Africa and much more with Sizwe now. Thanks for joining us, my friend. Let's talk about the world situation briefly. No, it's an honor to have you. I follow your work on social media with great interest. Let's talk about the world situation first, because that's not going to leave Africa untouched. If the balloon goes up, as I said, some of the things we're going to talk about will be OTOs. There'll be no BRICS. There'll be no Israel-Palestine question. There will be no a question of the world economy surviving without grave damage. Are people in Africa seized of the geopolitical situation unfolding right now in the Gulf?
Yeah. Thanks again, George. Look, we in Africa, there's a lot of diverse opinion as to what role the continent is meant to be playing in geopolitics. Because now it's been 60 years, over 60 years since so-called liberation for the continent, and there hasn't been much change in terms of Africans feeling like they've been liberated, they've been emancipated, and therefore there's always a sense of trepidation whenever events change, because it says, is it really going to bring a change? Is it another situation where we, as the continent, are being used as a playground for the imperialists? However, and this needs to be emphasized, that there's a growing sense amongst Africans that perhaps all is not what is portrayed as being. So, for instance, the West continues to portray Russia and especially China as neo-colonialists. So what they're saying is, look, this is what we did to you 150 years ago, with the scramble for Africa and then the Berlin Conference and all of that. So they are trying, the West that is trying to portray China and Russia as engaged in the same shenanigans that they, the West, have been on. However, when Africans themselves look around and look at all the work with the BRI that the Chinese have been doing, with the work and the assistance that the Russians have been offering the countries in the Sahel, in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, the military assistance fighting against terrorism, which again is terrorism that is seemingly sponsored by the French in the main, but also the United States for reasons that we know that they continue doing in West Asia and other places. So Africans are feeling that perhaps all is not cracked up, is not what the West is saying it is. It's not a situation where the Chinese and the Russians are looking to join the colonialists in this neo-colonialism. It could be that the Russians and the Chinese have a different agenda, an agenda that could be beneficial to the Africans. So there is this growing sense, and perhaps time will tell. Maybe as time goes on, we will learn as to what exactly the truth is. But I can assure you that at the moment, the Western propaganda is not exactly taking off.
Well, I spent a lot of time, some of the best years of my life, active in Southern African affairs, in solidarity with MPLA in Angola, with Frelimo in Mozambique, with the ANC in South Africa, with the ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. And of course, there was no doubt then whose side the different blocs were on. In apartheid South Africa was supported until it could not be supported any longer, and only at the last minute by the United States, by Britain, and so on, while Cuban troops were dying in Angola to defeat the armies of apartheid, and the American proxy armies in Mozambique, in Angola, and elsewhere. So that was only in the 1970s and 80s. We don't have to go back to the Congress of Berlin to see the perfidious nature of the West in Africa. But in recent times in South Africa, one has had the impression that the South African government has sought to if you like, keep its foot in both camps. And yet now we've got Donald Trump and Elon Musk effectively declaring economic war, at least, against South Africa. I mean, in a way, South Africa is going to have to wake up and smell the coffee, isn't it?
That's true. The thing is, you mentioned the African National Congress in South Africa. There's been a major shift in the leadership of the ANC, particularly its outlook and its policies, but generally the way it has been set up. What that means goes exactly into what you were saying, that it has, the ANC that is, attempted to keep the country in both camps, to appease everyone at the same time, to sort of have a situation where they can, spend a lot of time in the G20. South Africa is a part of the G20, but is also a founding member of the BRICS nations. So that has obviously been a shaky relationship, particularly between South Africa and the West. And as things have been happening and unfolding, I would imagine that the pressure that Donald Trump and his cronies over there in the United States are putting on South Africa is necessarily to force South Africa to make that choice, to choose whether they are going all in with BRICS or they are going with the West, and they become part of the vassals of the Western, or particularly the American empire. Now, that is a problem because, one, South Africa is not in a position to make that kind of choice, particularly to make a choice to go with the West. South Africa is very invested in BRICS. Right. For instance, if you take one example, South Africa put in, I think, was 10 billion or so into the BRICS Bank when it was founded, the New Development Bank. So that is an investment that the country has made into BRICS. Now, everything else, the trade that South Africa does, particularly with China, the stance, the neutral stance, but a more pro-Russian stance that the country has taken since the special military operation in the Ukraine by the Russians, and of course South Africa's position towards the Zionist regime in West Asia. All of that is an indication that South Africa cannot be extricated easily, if at all, from the BRICS bloc, but particularly from the pursuit of a multipolar world, because it is understood generally by anyone, even the liberals in this country, that a multipolar world would be to South Africa's benefit. Even those people who are pro-Western in the country today, when you follow what they do and you follow the work that they do a lot of business with China. They do a lot of business with they do a lot of business with BRICS countries themselves. So it is understood and it is accepted that BRICS is here to stay, and South Africa's role in BRICS is immense. South Africa is the largest economy in Africa, and therefore it cannot just be dismissed. And it makes sense why it's a fighting ground. It's a battleground between the West and the multipolar world, if you mean.
Yes, we must hope that people's memories are long enough to remember who was who and what was what in the struggle for liberation. But of course, there's membership of BRICS and there's membership of BRICS. One of the tensions that is produced by enlargement is a loss of direction, a loss of identity. So, for example, this very day, the United Arab Emirates, which is a member of BRICS, is involved in Air Force drills with the American and Israeli and Qatari Air Forces, which is, some would say, the ultimate betrayal. Arab Air Forces drilling with the Israeli and American Air Forces, whilst the people in Gaza are being slaughtered, and whilst World War III might be being planned, even as you and I speak. So you can be in BRICS, but to be, as you say, a founding member of BRICS and one of the powers that set the original direction for BRICS, these are two different things. Are you worried about that? Are you worried about the bigger BRICS gets, the less coherent and cohesive it's bound to be?
There was always that risk from the start. That's why for a while there were only 5 nations in BRICS, and that was for a reason, because there was always this trepidation that you're gonna bring in some people, you're gonna bring in some nations with different outlooks and different agendas, and they may start pulling in certain directions that may not align with the ethos of the BRICS formation. However, I think it's very important for us to see BRICS in the context of what it is and what it is not. So, for instance, when you compare it to other formations, say NATO, for instance, or the EU itself, or the G7, the G20, and other formations like that, a BRICS membership gives a lot of leeway and a lot of autonomy to the nations that join it. Yes, there are certain criteria that are required of these nations that are allowed to join, because not everyone who applies has been and will be allowed to join BRICS. But those that are allowed, you have to have certain let's say qualities. So for instance, they have to be a formidable economy. Like I said, South Africa is the largest economy in the world. Russia is the largest nuclear power in the world. For instance, China is the largest economy by purchasing power parity, and so forth and so forth. So there are these requirements that are there, that are solid, that anyone who comes into BRICS has to have these qualities. Now, when it comes to internal policies of these countries, you see a lot of difference. I mean, even the political systems are different. There's no requirement like in the West where you have to be a democracy, or at least pretend to be a democracy. Whereas here, there's different political systems, and therefore these countries will, for better or worse, engage themselves in certain activities. As you said, the UAE is now doing what they are doing now, participating in something that, for instance, South Africa has come out publicly and openly to oppose. I don't believe that the BRICS countries operate in a mold where you have a strict guidance as to what you can or you cannot do, what you may or may not do. Of course, I would expect and one would hope that there would be discussions around some of these things, and there would be situations where perhaps there's compromise from certain nations, because I would assume the Emiratis believe that they have reasons, they have valid reasons to be doing what they're doing. But that's what they would be saying. And is this a weakness on the part of BRICS? It could be seen as that, but it also could be seen as a strength, where nations are allowed to be autonomous. They are allowed to pursue policies that are in their national interest, as long as they remain strong economies, strong political forces, because in a multipolar world that the Chinese led, also by the Russians and the bigger nations, the idea is that we no longer want a situation where nations are dictated to by other nations. So bigger nations, whether it's one nation or a group of powerful nations, come out and say, no, you're not allowed to do this. We will not allow you, or else you get sanctioned if you do this. And that is the purpose of a multipolar world. There will be teething problems. And one of those problems, some of those problems are things like this one, where one BRICS member goes on participating effectively in a genocide, really, but that's where you have the situation where you have a round table a situation where you can come together and say, well, we know you have concerns, we understand that you have concerns, we are not going to sanction you, we're not going to kick you out of the block, but we have these concerns, and perhaps we could look into those things. I think the underlying point is that a BRICS membership is not only voluntary, but it is also very fluid. It allows nations to maintain a semblance of their sovereignty, because that's what we've seen with a unipolar world run by the United States, where no one is allowed to have any form of sovereignty. The United States decides what you will do in your own country, what you will do with your geopolitical issues, and then all of that. So it's unfortunate that the UAE has chosen this path, but I think going forward, it is one of those things that may or may not be engaged in and discussed amongst the member nations.
The West didn't end its negative interference in Africa with independence. Of course, they picked leaders, they murdered leaders. In my view, the greatest of all African leaders, Patrice Lumumba, was cruelly murdered and dismembered by imperialism. But even now in the Sudan, imperialism and its proxies are active, trying to dismember further what was once the huge and mighty potential of the Sudan. Does Africa take a view on these kinds of egregious interferences on the continent, or is consensus on that impossible to reach?
Africa has taken a strong view, particularly in the last few years, regarding interference, foreign interference in Africa's matters. So, in as much as imperialists have a foothold in the Sudan, they have a foothold in the DRC, but also almost everywhere on the continent. Even in South Africa, it's just been revealed how many CIA offices have been operating out of South Africa for many decades now, and we've always understood this. However, that does not then mean that Africans are okay with it. So leaders, you see, I think at times we have to be cognizant of the pressure that our leaders are placed under by the imperialists. So when you are a leader of a nation and the imperialists are on your neck, and you know they have the power, one, not only to destroy you, but also to kill you. You made an example of the great Patrice Lumumba, but also Thomas Sankara and many other leaders, Chris Hani back in the day, in the 90s. And so they always have this hold over our leaders, especially those ones who are currently in power. So it's not easy for these leaders to just come out and say, no, now we are taking an anti-imperial stance. That's why, for instance, South Africa has been seen to be a bit wishy-washy, going back and forth between this and that, because it's a very sensitive and a delicate situation. The empire may be dying, but it's still strong. It's not dead as yet. And it still holds a substantial amount of power over these weaker nations, as Africans are geopolitically, at least. So when you have that, and you look at what the Chinese, for instance, just to make an example, China is a powerful nation economically, even militarily now, and also the Russians in that way. However, they can't just wake up one morning and just de-dollarize, for instance. It takes time to move away from these entrenched Western systems. And they are not only economic, they are not only financial, they're also political. So there's a lot of political sway that the West holds over Africa. Now, when someone is looking, thinking, no, we're getting impatient, no, we're running out of time, no, it's been too long, the people are moving slowly, it's because the system is that entrenched. You look at the how much economic power and financial power, for instance, Britain, not one of the strongest nations anymore at this point, but it still has a hold on many of its former colonies in sub-Saharan Africa. You come to South Africa, you see a lot of corporations are still British, and a lot of capital that comes into the country and can leave the country at any moment is British. So it's a sensitive subject, because people are getting impatient. We are getting impatient. However, these things take time and it will require a lot of patience. But when it does happen, it will happen.
You mentioned the great Chris Hani, who I'm proud to say was a friend of mine, and the great Thomas Sankara. What do you make of Ibrahim Traore and the role that he's playing now? I must say, my wife and I are very big fans of his. We follow his every move. He's walking in the footsteps of Sankara. Is he going to come a cropper like Thomas did? Or is that grouping strong enough to become self-sufficient and be a light in Africa?
Speaking of Captain Traore, I think he's shown the sort of courage at a time when no one was expecting it. It was a norm to have people like Captain Traore back in the day, just before independence and immediately after independence. There were a lot of leaders of his caliber, but we started not seeing them anymore. And that's when the West had taken hold and the empire had taken control of the continent. However, he has introduced a way of thinking and a way of doing things, even though it's at a small scale, but it's a mindset. It's a mindset that says it is okay to be anti-imperialist, because there was a time when it had become a bit of a slur to be considered anti-imperialist, because it would be conflated with being anti-progress and being anti-democratic and all of these things. Captain Traore has come out to say those are not the important things that Africans need. Africans don't need more democracy. We've been having democracy. Africans don't need more liberal reforms and all sorts of types of things that the West keeps coming up with. Through US aid, we've seen how, as things have been declassified, quote unquote, where we've been seeing that the US aid has been coming to the continent to teach people this or that and make people do those things. Captain Traore is saying that is not important to the masses of our people. So we don't need more liberalism. For instance, what people need is sovereignty. And it's a concept that surprisingly is very foreign to many Africans. We have not understood what sovereignty looks like, what it means, and why it is necessary. And the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, which Burkina Faso and Captain Traore are part of, has charted a course, or at least set an outline to say, look, you have to want to be sovereign. So it's one thing to become sovereign. You have to want it. You have to pursue it. And you have to find ways. It's not easy. With the sanctions that come with it and the destabilization that comes with it. The point is, the West is going to do this regardless of what you do. So it's not a matter of, if you follow their dictates, then they will spare you. They don't. They keep coming. That's why Africa has not had anything, because, since the 80s, Africans have been following the IMF and all these institutions and listening to their advice. And it has always led to disaster. You look at the economies, Nigeria was the largest economy on the continent. It's been regressive. Why? They followed the dictates of the IMF. They listened to the IMF experts tell them what to do. So Captain Traore is saying, you don't have to listen to these people. You don't have to do what they want you to do. You can go with what the Russians are doing. You can work with the Russians, because for many years we're told, no, you see, the Soviet Union has collapsed, so you have nothing to see. There's nothing to see over there, and you can't be looking towards the Russians because they were vanquished in 1990 and all of that. So you have to do what the West tells you to do, but it has led to disaster. They destroyed the Nigerian economy. They destroyed the entirety of the country of Libya, and they'll continue to do it to many other countries. South Africa is seen as many Africans who live outside of this country that I'm from, South Africa, have an impression that this is a stable, proper, powerful country. It's not. It is not. You see it when you're on the ground. You can see that the more you listen to the West and you listen to their advice and you financialize your economy, you de-industrialize, because that's what they want you to do, you run into problems, and this is what Africans continue to learn.
Fantastic. A great tour of the horizon in the continent of Africa and indeed the world. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for joining us on this Have It Out with Galloway shows. Andreas Koreas is in Cyprus, and always welcome, Andreas. Cyprus is in the middle of the great crises that are now enveloping. The British are flying out of your sovereign country on behalf of Israel. You have allowed your territory to be used as part of the genocide. And I know you wholly oppose that, but I'm wondering how many of your compatriots are even aware of it.
Hello, George. You are more than welcome in Cyprus next summer. I have a lot of space for you and your whole family. It's true that Cyprus participates in this situation in Israel. We have a very pro-Israel government, unfortunately, although our people is not so much pro-Israel. I think the majority, or at least half of the Cypriot population, is pro-Palestine. But again, we have a pro-Israeli government, and the British forces are using the territories that they have according to the Declaration of Independence, which is a declaration that allows them to have the British military bases and use them in the way they want. But again, of course, Cyprus has its own part of responsibility, and I wish we had a different government that will resist in this genocide. My question is about the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act that expires this year. And I think, but I also want your opinion, that Trump will probably not agree to any extension if we consider his protectionist policy. Also, this in combination with the fact that Russia forgave 23 billion of debt recently and promised to provide technology that will allow Africa to secure food sufficiency. And I want your opinion on these two developments, if they are a part of the whole BRICS project.
Well, as I was implying or alluding with our distinguished guest, I'm no longer as in love with BRICS as I was last year. And I think that Kazan was a lot of missed opportunities. And it was also the moment that a lot of Trojan horses or potential Trojan horses entered the bloc. And I've mentioned just one of them today, but there are others that don't just dilute the BRICS project, but can be used to overwhelm it, can be used to undermine it. And I don't need to enumerate or name them. People will know who I'm talking about, but the United Arab Emirates is not the only one. So going back to your first point, I think that Donald Trump is not interested in renewing treaties. He doesn't want to deal with people as blocs, hence his contempt for the European Union, for example. He wants to deal with European countries individually and on the basis of which will be slavish to him, which he will implement tariffs on, and those that he will not. And I think that they have begun their new approach to Africa with their war. There's no other way of putting it. They've declared war, not military war, yet at least, on South Africa over the undeniably sovereign issue of land ownership in South Africa. I mean, what conceivable right would America have to dictate who owns what land inside South Africa? I mean, that's almost a joke, but that's what they are doing, and whilst doing it, completely misrepresenting the true facts of the issues surrounding land ownership in South Africa. And not a day goes by without new US measures being announced. Whether they actually ever come to anything is another matter, against South Africa. And they are definitely involved in the DRC. They are definitely involved in the conflict in the Sudan. They are allies, France in particular, but also Belgium. And we heard from Sizwe, also the British, are not giving up on Africa. And from, you know, scorpions sting because they're scorpions. Imperialists behave the way they are because they are imperialist. And Africa is a lot to give up. Africa has undreamt of wealth and is a potential superpower in the next 30 years. Not in my lifetime, but definitely in the lifetime of my children. Africa could be up there with the biggest and most powerful countries in the world. So the West is not giving up on Africa, and it's a question of how they can catch the thing. Can they do it best by AGPOA, or can they do it best by bilateral bullying and browbeating? My guess is that Trump is more inclined to the latter. I thank you for your kind invitation. I don't think your government would welcome me, but I know that you and your friends would. I must just say in passing, it is extraordinary that Cyprus, once at the cutting edge, once in the vanguard of progress, of non-alignment, of progressive politics, should have a pro-Israel government. And Greece should have. Greece was once the preeminent European friend of the Palestinian people. And now both Greece and Cyprus have pro-Israel governments. It's an extraordinary turn of events and not a good one. Always great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Let's go to London, where Desmond Thompson has a point of view. Desmond, welcome. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon to you, George. I really want to address a question to your guest. First of all, my involvement with Southern Africa goes way back September of 1961.
Wow.
I know the country very well. That whole region. I've experienced the good, the bad, the ugly, and the evil that's gone on there. I'm still involved with the country. I've used it as my base to live in other countries, but it's in Africa is in my heart. What I want to ask is, when your guest mentioned about the wealth of South Africa, the entire economy and wealth is controlled by three families. In South Africa, it's the Rupert family, and up to a few years ago, the Oppenheimers, and of course the Rothschilds. These are the three families that control not only Southern Africa and wealth, but most of Africa. As an example, in 1994, the Oppenheimer family controlled 60% of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The gold, the wealth, the coal that comes out of South Africa does not benefit the people of South Africa. It benefits only these few families. And under President Mbeki, we allowed the Ruperts and the Oppenheimers to take their entire empire financially out of Southern Africa, and their assets in money was converted into foreign currency, which affected the South African rand, and they pay almost no tax. Where under the old government, the national government, these families had to pay 40% tax, which was spent on all races in South Africa. So the giraffe in the room, no one's talking about, and I mentioned giraffe because the giraffe has got no vocal cords. And so the wealth of these countries throughout South Africa is controlled by these families and other families, like, for instance, the Rockefellers. I go into the Angola situation, who controls Angola and why the MPLA was supported by the Rockefeller families who brought in the Cubans, et cetera, but that's another issue. So
it is, and a fascinating one. I think that South Africa is a playground for Western capital. These families, of course, were historically very significant bloodsuckers of the South African people, but they are less so today, partly for the reasons you allude to, that they actually moved their wealth out of the country. But Western corporations, including, as Sizwe said, British corporations are present. There is no doubt that the economic justice has not yet been delivered to the mass of the people in South Africa. Dismantling apartheid is no small thing. You and I both know it. And remember the days when, somebody put a pencil in your hair to see how curly your hair was. Somebody measured your nose to see what racial classification you should be, and that you could not marry the person that you loved if they were of a different race to you. It's not a small thing to have defeated that, but it's necessary but not sufficient, and economic justice is still awaited by the mass of the people in South Africa. Abdul Jalil Khan Rao is in India. Abdul, welcome. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon, Mr. Galloway. This is my first time being here, so first of all, thank you for having me here. Really excited to be here. Originally, my question was a bit different, but I'll try to put it in context of Africa. My point, and I would like to know your point of view on this as well. Considering Russia's position or status quo as of now, with its conflict with Ukraine, if the world accepts the status quo, or if it accepts the annexed oblasts to Africa, to Russia, my point of view is that we would enter a new imperial age where nations are defined by irredentism rather than autonomy and democracy. And if and when that happens, we hope that doesn't happen, but if that happens, what would be the fate of Africa as an entire continent? And what do you think that Africa would be able to fight back this imperial age if we enter into it?
Well, on the latter point, I very much do. If Africa can produce the kind of leaders that Sizwe and I were talking about, historic leaders and contemporary ones, more of the former, less of the latter, then Africa has a lot of cards to play. It is the place where most of the rare earth minerals, where the basic raw materials essential to modern economies, and the profusion of commodities there, the population, all that land, all that water. Africa has a lot of cards to play, but it has to want sovereignty, as Sizwe put it. I think that you should not conflate the issue of irredentism with what's happening in Ukraine right now. Neither can you really talk about nations, because the Russian and Ukrainian people are the same nation. Indeed, they were citizens of the same country until 30 years ago. The levels of intermarriage, the levels of Russian language spoken by a third of the people in the country and so on, they don't fit neatly into one nation fighting another nation. You'd be better describing what's happening in Ukraine right now as a civil war within the Russian people that the West has been acting on. But I do think you're onto something in this regard. We are about to enter into a period that we once had before, which is spheres of influence, where it will be recognized that one will not interfere in other superpowers' spheres of influence. I do think we need to have a longer discussion on that. I cut you short only because Gaza is on the line. I think first, though, we'll go to Bath with my old friend, Dr. Matthew Alford.
You're coming to me, George. I have been making a series of short films for YouTube called The Crucial Point, which tries to identify key pieces of evidence in a range of conspiracy theories, particularly assassinations, such as Princess Diana, Jeffrey Epstein, also 9/11. And I know that you've already had a positive embrace of the JFK conspiracy, but I was wondering what other conspiracy theories you find convincing, and was there a key piece of evidence that cemented your view?
I think 9/11 is the big enchilada. I don't think that we know anything like everything about 9/11. I've found my own views beginning to move and shift, and we've partly reflected that on the Mother of All talk shows and here on Have It Out with Galloway. The Looming Tower would be a series I recommend to you. It's self-evident that the American state was not talking to each other, and that some parts of the American deep state was more deeply involved in the catastrophe of 9/11, 2001, than we currently know. I call for a new 9/11 inquiry, and we badly, badly need it because so much has flowed from the bloodshed on that day. Let me go to Gaza to bring an end to the show. Mohammed Al-Farah in Gaza. Mohammed, welcome. Brother, unmute. Well, unfortunately, Mohammed's internet let us down, which is understandable as he is in Gaza. And it therefore allows me to make some concluding remarks in thanking everyone who appeared today and those who were not able to, and we'll make every opportunity for you to do so in subsequent weeks, if there are any subsequent weeks. It's difficult to exaggerate the seriousness of the moment at which we have arrived. The President of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, is openly, publicly, repeatedly, in ever more lurid language, threatening to attack the Islamic Republic of Iran. And by extension, its close allies, Russia and China, cannot fail to be concerned. And Putin, just this day, has warned of a catastrophe if the United States goes ahead with this attack. Given the consequences that are likely to flow, certain to flow, from any US attack on Iran, you would probably say only a madman would embark on that course of action. But a madman is threatening that course of action, which will bring ruin on the world, which will bring death and destruction in the entire region, and which will have consequences unforeseen, it would appear, by the political class in Washington, D.C., and those Western countries that will go along with them. Be sure of one thing, that nothing could hasten the day that Iran does build nuclear weapons than any attack on its entirely legal, peaceful nuclear program. And if the United States thinks that it can contain such an attack to a one-off, performative, demonstrative attack, they are making a very grave error. Because the Iranian people are a united people, united for sovereignty. They want sovereignty. For the last 45 years, they've had sovereignty for the first time in their modern history. And they're not going to give it up. They are not going to bow the knee to the sword of the empire. So Donald Trump, I take what might be this last opportunity to appeal to you not to go into that. Good night. I've been George Galloway. You've been a great audience. This has been Have It Out with Galloway. I hope to see you again soon.